Guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm back. My name is Aaron Freeman. I'm over at FalcFans.com. I'm joined with my good friend and co-host Scott Karasik, who covers the Falcons for the Falcoholic. We are back on the week before the Combine to discuss, the decision that the Falcons are going to cut Paul Soliai. We'll talk about a few more cuts that might be on the way. Of course, we'll talk about the NFL scouting combine this week and some of the guys that we're going to be looking at and what drills that people need to be paying attention. Scott and I got into a little bit of a Twitter battle earlier today about the offensive line and size, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And as usual, we'll always answer your mailbag questions at the end of the show. And we might sprinkle a little of them in between the show as well. I like that little feature that you added last time you guys did the show without me, Scott. So we'll try that up as well with me instead of Gina and Sammy. So I'm glad to be back. It's been a while. It feels like it's been forever since I've done this. So I hope no one's out there disappointed that I'm back. I thought Gina and Sammy did a great job holding down the fort. But let's start talking about the Falcons. No one cares about what I think. Let's talk about Paul Soliai. And we've talked in the past. I remember someone asking us a mailbag question at the end of the season after he went on IR and wondered if that was going to be the last we saw of Paul Soliai, and it ended up being true. He was asked to take a pay cut. Apparently, the two sides didn't agree to the right price, and the Falcons going to cut him at the start of the league year on March 9th. That's when free agency kicks off. They're going to designate him a June 1st cap, which basically means that the cap space that is created won't come off the books until June 2nd. So the Falcons, technically, Paul Soliai is going to be on their roster until, as far as salary cap goes, is basically going to be counted as part of the salary cap between now and June 2nd. But, Scott, how much space are the Falcons going to be freeing up making Soliai a June 1st cut?
It's something like $4 million this year, and then another 8 next, and then another 6 after that.
So plenty of space.
Oh, most definitely.
Now, Scott, I'm curious where you stand on this. I've gotten a lot of people talking about how the Falcons are second in the league behind the Saints with all the dead money they're carrying. Obviously, cutting Soliai as a June 1st cut, if people don't understand what that means, is basically when you cut a player, whatever unpaid bonuses, like signing bonuses or any roster bonuses that are due imminently, accelerate to the cap as dead money. And if you cut a player after June 1st, that dead money only is spread out basically over 2 years. And so you take less of a hit cap-wise if you cut a guy in June versus if you cut a guy in March. Obviously, the Falcons are going to be spreading out more dead money to this year and next year by cutting Soliai with a June 1st designation. Does it concern you that the Falcons have so much dead money, or is this not a big deal?
I think people overblow dead money because they think it's like added on to what the contract already was. But dead money is a way of life in the NFL, and yeah, the Falcons are going to have a lot of it, but a lot of that has to do with bad contracts to Sam Baker, and then signing John Asamoah without realizing that in the future they're going to have someone other than Asamoah playing right guard. So those are the two main things that are killing the dead money right now for the Falcons. And then William Moore's contract isn't really helping, and Justin Durant's contract isn't really helping. But would you rather have a 31-year-old, often injured, William Moore or Justin Durant?
Yeah. I think the thing about dead money is, you're right, it's a way of life in the NFL. And if you got to eat some dead money now in order to free up space later, then I think it's worth it to you. I mean, that's basically what Carolina did for a couple of years, a few years back when they cut Steve Smith. They were basically like they had to take an L on some of these bad contracts that the previous GM had given out. And, now they're going to be moving forward with a lot more money to be able to spend. And it's one of those things where it doesn't really hurt the Falcons cap-wise this year because they're still going to be like at 25 or 30 plus million in cap space. So having 15 or 16 or whatever it winds up being 20 million in dead money isn't going to really be that much of a negative. And most of that's going to come off the books next year.
So, for what it's worth, on a projected 157, because those are the most recent numbers that I'm seeing, they'd have $36 million in cap space after the Paul Soliai cut hits.
Yeah. I think they'll be spending a good chunk of that. And I think probably what the Soliai movie is going to do is going to give them the space to sign their rookies.
Yeah, it's their they did it last year. It's their way of basically like forcing themselves to have that money for the rookies allocated in the piggy bank.
Pretty much. So what do the Falcons do to replace Paul Soliai? He obviously had a sort of resurgent year after a sort of lackluster 2014 campaign. You can make the case that he was certainly in the top 3 of our defensive linemen this past year. Where you put him at in that top 3 or 4 or whatever, is up to debate, but no doubt about it that he played well this past season. So obviously the Falcons are going to miss him to a certain degree, but it's a matter of how much they're going to miss him and whether or not they have anybody already on the roster that can step up and fill those roles. People have thrown out Grady Jarrett as a potential candidate. People have thrown out Joey Mabu. I can't say his name. And people are also talking and speculating about the Falcons signing a nose tackle in free agency or maybe drafting a defensive tackle when he gets to the draft. So, Scott, what do you sort of stand on sort of the in-house candidates like Grady Jarrett and Mabu versus adding somebody new?
I mean, I think Grady Jarrett's going to end up playing 60% of the snaps next year. I just don't think it's going to be all in the base. I think he'll see maybe out of the 100% of the snaps from the nose tackle, he'll see maybe 10% of the ones that get allocated to the base, and then the rest of them will be like all sub-package, where you'll have Hageman out there, you'll have Jarrett out there, you'll have basically Jarrett and Babineau in the sub-package, and you'll have Hageman and someone else who's massive in the base package. Whether it's Joey Mbu or just looking at who's out there, you've got Terrence Knighton, who could be a stopgap. You've got Henry Melton, who could be more of that interior speed rusher if you slid Hageman over. You could do Steve McClendon, the nose tackle from the Steelers. Sammy Lee Hill's going to be out there. I don't see Brandon Mabane being the right one, just because he's not what he once was, and I don't see Haloti Ngata being that guy either, as the one that they signed. Even though Haloti Ngata would be amazing and fun and probably one of my favorite players to ever play in the NFL, I just don't see him coming to Atlanta. At least not for the price that I think that they'd want him to take. Now, if he'd come in for like $4 million a year for 3 years, hell yeah, bring him in. I don't think he's coming in for that. He's also not what he once was. Also, BJ Raji, he took 1.75 last year from the Packers. He had a good year. I wouldn't mind seeing him come in for $2-3 million a year. There's a lot of decent players out there, but my absolute favorite is Snacks. Damon Harrison from the Jets. If there's anyone out there that you can go out, bring in, and say, hey, this guy is a true upgrade from Paul Soliai, it's all big old Snacks. He's used to playing about 60% of the snaps. He gets good pass rush on the interior. He eats double teams in the run game. He's probably one of the most underrated players in the NFL. And he's a big reason why that Jets defense works the way it does. And I think if Atlanta could somehow lure him down here, 4-year, 5-year deal, I would pay him the money that they paid Paul Soliai in a heartbeat. Because I think he'd be worth that money. Because I think he'd impact the defense that way. And I think he could play a 50-50 split with Jarrett at nose tackle and be one of those guys that, hey, he does play in the sub package every now and again. He does play on the goal line. He does create, or he does force those double teams to where you're like, oh, damn it, this guy's destroying us up in the middle. And I think he's one of the few nose tackles in the NFL that could handle that combination in Carolina of, Ryan Khalil and Trey Turner, who are arguably one of the top left guard center combinations in the league, if not the top.
Okay. All right. Interesting. I would agree with you. I think Snacks is I certainly wouldn't give him this ball. So I don't think you'd give any nose tackle that type of deal unless he's maybe Don Terry Poe would be the one guy I would give that type of money to. But I would certainly agree with you that he's probably much more deserving of that type of money than Soliai was, particularly because, Snacks is in the prime of his career, and he's probably going to play another decade in the NFL, as opposed to Soliai, who you're just kind of hoping can eke out another 4 or 5 years. I do think Mebane is going to be the Falcons' target. I just think the connection between Dan Quinn and him is going to be good enough. I don't think Mebane's going to cost a lot of money. Like, you look at what they were going to pay Soliai over these next 2 years, I think it was like $14 million. I think you can definitely get Mebane on a cheaper deal than that. So I think it's a win-win for the Falcons. He'd probably wind up signing for something, in between what we gave Babineau 2 years ago and less than 2 years, $12 million, something like 3 years, $15 million or something like that, which I think for a two-down player who's in his 30s, I think that's a fine price to pay. We have a mailbag question, and it's from Digital Demon 6. He said, who would be your ideal replacement for Paul Soliai, either from free agency or the draft, and which is more likely to you? And obviously, Scott, we both kind of answered the first part of that question. But do you think it's likelier that the Falcons go free agency with the nose tackle spot, or do you think they go with another young guy that they can sort of develop for the future?
I mean, I'd love for them to go free agency, but when it comes to the draft, if there was any draft to do it, it's this year. You could take a guy in the 4th round. That's how deep this draft is, and get a guy who would normally go in the 2nd of a regular draft, and still wind up with a nice big body nose tackle who knows what the hell he's doing, someone who could be a solid space eater. I mean, I've got 3rd round grades on guys like Jihad Ward, and he's my 18th interior defensive lineman. I mean, it's just a really, really good class. A name to look out for, because I saw that the Falcons were rumored to be very, very interested in him. At the Senior Bowl, or not the Senior Bowl, I think it was a Shrine game, DJ Reader out of Clemson.
Okay.
He's, again, 4th round, 6'3", 330-pound guy, big body in the middle. I think if there's a guy who is going to be that Brandon Mebane role in Atlanta, but be a younger version, I think you could see DJ Reader doing that. He's a lot quicker than his frame would suggest. He gets off the ball. He understands how to play in games. He can do both the nickel and the base packages. So you could have a nice rotation with him and Jarrett at the 1. You could also have situations where you've got Reeder, Jarrett, and Beasley out there, and they know what they're doing together. But I think that would be a very, very good fit and a very good combination for them in the middle.
Okay. I agree with you, Scott. This is a very good draft to get somebody in the middle of the defensive line. But I do think, to answer Digital Demon's question, I think it's much likely that we'll go in free agency, because it's one of those things where one of the reasons why I was so kind of against the Soliai contract at the same time, because I think getting these sort of run pluggers is relatively easy to do. Like when you're looking at defensive starting positions, and that's really like 12 spots when you count the nickel cornerback. To me, the 2-down run stuffer and probably a sort of edge-setting strong side linebacker are probably the 2 easiest positions to fill in a defense, and I don't necessarily understand why teams splurge on sort of these guys that are going to be off the field for most defenses on third downs and whatnot. So it's one of those things where I think you can go cheap and get a competent guy, and I think that's all you really need. Obviously, if you can get a dominant player like a Snacks Harrison, then great, but I don't necessarily feel like that you need that in order for your defense to function, particularly our defense, where I think, by year's end, Soliai was playing maybe 35, 40% of the snaps. So it's one of those things where I think you can get a competent guy, and I think this is not only is this a good draft class for defensive tackles, I think it's a very good free agency class for these types of nose tackles, as Scott mentioned a bunch of them, and they're not going to be super, super expensive. So I think it's worth the Falcons' while to sort of go ahead, start out free agency, plug in somebody immediately, and worry about drafting if they're going to go for a defensive tackle. Come draft time, getting somebody who has a little bit more upside to be more of a pass rusher than a 2-down thumper. Okay, so speaking of the Soliai thing, we got another question from Eric Schauwaller. He asks, question, can you explain why everyone is waiting till the start of the new league year to cut people? Thanks.
Based on the cap and the collective bargaining agreement, you're not able to pretty much do anything regarding a June 1st cut until the start of the league year. The people that are being cut and that are cut for 2016 are getting cut prior to the league year so that they can hopefully get a little bit more cap savings. But it ends up being about the same depending on what it is. Like, a guy with 1 year left on his contract gets cut now because it doesn't really matter if you cut him post June 1st or not. It's going to be the same hit regardless. A guy with 2+ years, you only take that first year's cap hit of bonus. If it's a post June 1st cut, you only take that first year's cap hit of bonus in 2016, and then all the subsequent years go to the next year. So the best example is Paul Soliai. He has 3 years left on his deal. He can't be cut until March, I think, 11th, which is the first day of the league year, due to the cap situation, due to the post-June 1st situation. If he was cut prior to June 1st, without the post-June 1st designation, he'd cost the Falcons $4.2 million in cap space of dead money. Keep in mind, he was going to count 6.3, so he would have saved the money that way anyway. Now, because he's cut with post-June 1st designation, he only counts 1.4 million in 2016, and then in 2017 the 2017 and 2018 hits get applied to 2017's cap as a total of 2.8 million in 2017. If it sounds confusing, I apologize. It's much easier to visualize and see, hey, all right, before June 1st, after June 1st, this makes sense. but basically the cap gets split up that way. And that's the best way I know how to explain it. And the reason why the Falcons did a injury settlement with John Asamoah is because it reduced his cap hit. Had they just cut him last year, his cap hit for this year would have been close to $6 million, and it's only $3.9 million. So they the settlement that they agreed to shaves a good $2.1 million off the cap. Basically, he waived all of his guaranteed money that he was going to get next year.
All right, let me try to jump in here and sort of clarify what Scott was saying if you guys were confused. Basically, teams are allowed, the new CBA allows teams to designate up to two of their cuts to be post-June cuts at the beginning of the league year. And the league year starts actually on March 9th. That's when at 4 p.m. Eastern time, March 9th, I think that's a Wednesday. Basically, that's when free agency is going to kick off and you're going to hear all the official things. But because of the new rules where there's like a 3-day period, I think it's going to start on that Saturday or Sunday before, you'll hear about people negotiating. It's a negotiating window. But basically, for the June 1st cuts, you can't cut those guys. If you're going to designate them as a post-June cut, you can't cut them until the league year starts. Just the rules say that. Now, if you were just going to cut them as a regular guy, as Scott tried to explain, then you can cut them now like we did with Durant and Willie Moe. And, you don't get the June 1st benefit or whatever you want to call it. So the difference is, again, as we tried to explain, it spreads out the dead money differently. But I won't try to explain it. If you're still confused, then just Google it, and maybe you'll understand it a little bit better than what we're trying to explain. So speaking of those cuts, there's a couple of other people that I think both of us are expecting to get cut. I don't think the Falcons are done with their cuts. I think last year they made their cuts, like the Blaylock cut and the Harry Douglas cut and the Steven Jackson cut. I think all those cuts were made after the combine. Obviously, the combine is this week. It ends, I think the last day is next Monday. So I think if that follows suit, then we'll hear, something Tuesday or Wednesday about more cuts being made before the start of that sort of negotiating window. So Scott, who are some of the guys that you think are going to get cut?
I mean, Tyson Jackson, it hasn't been announced, but I think it's almost guaranteed that he's going to get cut. Man, Eric Weems, I don't think he gets cut straight out right away. I think he makes it to camp and then they cut him from camp. Let's see. And then Roddy White, maybe, maybe not. I do think Devin Hester should get cut. I think he's a waste of $3 million this year. I think if they cut Matt Bryant, it's probably for the best. And a dark horse is probably Andy Levitre. I don't think they cut Brooks Reed just yet. I think they look at this year as a prove-it year. Worst case scenario, they got a backup for $3 million. But Andy Levitre, I think, could be very well cut post-June 1st. Should the Falcons sign someone like Kelechi Osemele or a Brandon Brooks, that kind of type player, a bigger guy who might be a good fit for the zone blocking scheme, regardless of what you say, Aaron.
Okay. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Who's a good fit for the zone blocking scheme because they can still move and also might be a little bit more expensive but would be worth every penny. I mean, if you're paying 5 years, $45 million for Kelechi Osemele at age 27? 26? Yeah, he's 26. 26-year-old Kelechi Osemele. I'd pay 5 years, $45 million to put him next to Jake Matthews and whoever the hell is going to be center. All day, every day.
All right. Okay. I'll save off the big offensive line to talk. Yeah, I agree with you. I think Tyson Jackson's definite. I think Weems is on the bubble just because it's an easy sort of. It's like basically it's like I think it's like $900K in cap space, which isn't a whole lot, but you can probably sign, that's basically one free agent that you can sign, one decent free agent. And given his age and sort of his diminishing value, to me, he's on the bubble. So you might be right that he might stay until training camp. But basically, I do feel like the Falcons probably think they can upgrade this. But, I've been saying for months now that Roddy White wasn't going to be back with the team. I still believe that. I think he'll get cut. I think Hester's probably going to get cut too. To me, the interesting thing is with Hester and Bryant and Reed particularly is we've seen the team sort of purge all these guys that were injury prone. We've seen them cut Asamoah. We've seen them cut Moore. We've seen them cut Durant. We've seen them cut Soliai. All these guys basically were injured last year. And it seems like there's an aversion to guys that have injury question marks. Hester's going to miss most of the offseason with a toe injury. I don't know if Matt Bryant's status is, but, obviously Hester, Bryant, and Reed missed significant chunks of 2015 with injuries. So it does make me concerned maybe the Falcons might move on from some of those guys. I think of those three, Hester's probably the guy on the shakiest ground. I agree with you. I think Reed probably does stay, but I'm not as confident as I was a couple of months ago that he does. And with Matt Bryant, I think Matt Bryant will stay. But again, I'm not as confident as I was maybe a month or two ago that happens. Now that we've seen the Falcons sort of cut some of these other injured guys, I agree with you. Levitri is probably a guy that's on some shaky ground. I think he'll probably stay. I agree with you. I think if the Falcons do make a big splash in free agency, then I think, particularly at the guard spot, I think then it's going to be harder for Levitri to make it to camp. But I think with Levitri, it's going to be interesting to me because we already cut John Asamoah. Chester's a free agent. And if you cut Levitri, unless you sign a guy or unless you draft a guy, basically your starting guards going into next season are basically James Stone and Mike Person, which I don't think is a position that you want to be in. And I think they'll carry Levitri until they know with 100% certainty that they got someone there. And we can start talking a little bit more about these offensive linemen now, but it's I agree with you. I think Osemele and guys like Brandon Brooks are good players. I wouldn't be against the Falcons signing them. I guess the thing I was trying to say earlier on Twitter was when you look at all the moves that the Falcons have made over the last year and you look at Kyle Shanahan's history both in Cleveland and Washington and even his dad's history in Denver, there has been a clear and obvious preference for smaller, quicker interior offensive linemen. They'll go out and get a 320-pound tackle every now and then, like we saw in Washington with Trent Williams. But for the most part, all their guards and centers are going to be smaller, 6'2", 6'3", 300, 305 sort of guys. And we saw that last year. We saw them get rid of guys like Asamoah and Hawley, who could play in his own blocking scheme. We sat here, 6 months ago saying Asamoah and Hawley are great fits in the zone blocking scheme, and the Falcons cut them because they weren't quite to the level that Kyle Shanahan wanted them to be. And I just think it would be a surprise to me if we saw them go after guys like Brandon Brooks and Osemele. It's not a comment on those guys' skill set because I think both of those guys do fit the zone blocking scheme, have been successful in the zone blocking scheme, could certainly be successful in Atlanta. It just, based off of the history of Shanahan's teams and his offense, that doesn't seem like the type of player that the Falcons would target. And so I don't expect the Falcons to go out and get this 315, 320-pound guard this offseason.
And I think that's fair, but you kind of forget a couple of the guys like Eric Winston, who coming out was 315 pounds. They traded for a couple of guys who were 310, 315 pounds. Alex Mack was 315. So, I mean, it's not like they're completely against those, but you also ignore the fact that Brandon Brooks ran a 4.99 coming out of college. And it is one of the quicker guys, especially for his weight at the position. And it translates to film. Like, it's not like you're just saying, oh, hey, this guy can run quick. Does it really, whatever, it doesn't really translate. No, it translates to film just how quick Brandon Brooks really is. And I think he'd fit just fine in Shanahan's scheme. The reason why they want to get bigger is for the pass blocking benefits that you see. Now, whether or not it ends up being Brandon Brooks here in Atlanta, I don't know for sure. I'm going to be honest with you. But who's to say they don't go out and get Donald Stevenson, 315-pound former tackle, and say, you know what, you're quick, you're agile. You may not be the best at tackling in the NFL, but we're going to sign you and put you at right guard. This offseason. That might make sense. Oh, hey, look, there's Amini Silatolu. He was a bad fit for whatever team he was on, for Carolina. Byron Bell, right? Byron Bell was playing right tackle for Carolina. Awful fit there. But he's quick. He's a little bit bigger. He might be a good fit for the Falcons as a guard. And, yeah, he wasn't ideal at right tackle no matter where he played. But when they put him at guard, he wasn't awful. Alex Boone's out there. He's a little bit bigger than what you'd expect. He's about 310, 315. I don't think they're going after, like, massive dudes outside of Osamele. I think if Osamele's out there, they're going to get him. If he wants to come here, they will go and get him because I think he fits what they really want. He's quick enough to play tackle. He can move. He's a great fit. He's got power and speed behind him. And I think if they could get him and structure an Alex Mack deal to where they can get both, they should do it. And then the other thought there is even if they go center, even if they look at like centers to switch over, Ben Jones has experience in the scheme. Stefan Wisniewski has experience in the scheme. Trying to think who else. Ted Larson doesn't have experience in the scheme, but has quickness behind him. So those are three names that would make sense. Larson is honestly a little bit smaller than this argument would allow, but at 305. But he does seem to fit what they'd be looking for. Wisniewski measured in at 315 in at the combine, and then Ben Jones is probably closer to 315 now. So, I mean, if you're looking at 315-pounders, it's not a big deal. I think you can get away with a 315-pounder, like Dwayne Brown.
Okay. I don't really disagree with you, Scott. Like, if you're asking me would I be happy if the Falcons signed some of those guys that you mentioned, with the exception of Ben Jones, would I'd be fine with it. I just think the point I'm trying to make is I don't think Shanahan has shown any inclination in his entire history that those are the types of guys that he likes. Like, it would be weird to me for the Falcons, 3 months after cutting John Asamoah, basically saying we don't feel like John Asamoah is a fit for us moving forward, and then to basically go out and get somebody who, like Brandon Brooks. Like, I would sit here and tell you that I think Brandon Brooks moves at, whatever he's listed at now, 320, 335, or whatever he is, moves just as well as John Asamoah does at 305. But if Asamoah isn't as athletic as they want, then why would they go out and get Brooks? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But
I think Asamoah looked like he took a couple steps back this past offseason too, athletically. He did not look as quick as he used to be. Brooks looked a lot quicker this past season than Asamoah did this past season. That's the argument that I could see being made. Brooks looks like, 2014 and prior Asamoah, but he did not look like Asamoah did not look like 2014 and prior Asamoah this past season. So I think there was legitimacy to that hip issue that they were talking about.
Okay, maybe you're right. You might be right. I don't know. It just it just doesn't seem to mesh with what they've done, what Shanahan has done. So, it could be a case of Dan Quinn or somebody else coming in and saying, this guy's really good. You need to make an exception for him. And they'll go out and get him. But I don't expect it to happen. So that's all I was saying.
I think we'll be surprised. And the only reason why I keep saying that is because I'm so used to seeing old Vaughn McClure post something up and everybody going, yeah, this doesn't make sense. And then magically it comes true. And you're like, God damn it, Vaughn.
Yeah, you're right. If Vaughn writes something, then it actually has a chance of happening, at least a pretty good chance of happening. So, but yeah, we'll see. Wouldn't be the first time I was wrong.
A couple people that make sense that aren't being thrown out there. Mitchell Schwartz as a possibility. He's not a left tackle, and right tackles don't make the kind of money that guards do. So it wouldn't shock me to see him as a potential fit for Atlanta. He knows the scheme from his days from that year in Cleveland that he spent with Shanahan. Shanahan loved him, and he's a 320-pound tackle who could play 320-pound guard, right next to Ryan Schrader.
Well, I was just going to say, tell Lane Johnson that right tackles don't make a lot of money. But, yeah.
Lane Johnson played left tackle most of this past year with Jason Peters out. And the Eagles are probably just going to cut Jason Peters. Another name that would be interesting would be Bobby Massey. I think he could play inside. He's probably closer to that 310 at this point in his career than the 315 that he came out at. But he's got a lot of good quickness to his game. And even if he did play at 315, he could play right tackle, right guard, and probably do very well with it. The other name out there is Calvin Beachum, who plays at close to 315. Again, quick enough to play tackle, but will play guard, Actually, Beachum can play anywhere on the line. I would trust Beachum as a center.
Yeah, I mean, I like Beachum, but I think he's basically come out and said to the Steelers, pay me like a left tackle, which kind of probably prevents him from being a Falcon because I don't think they're going to pay him left tackle money and not play him at left tackle. So, all right, Scott, let's move on to the Combine. This is the big event this week. This is the thing that you constantly hear. Hey, Combine's overrated. Oh, now there's the thing. Oh, the Combine's not that important. Now it's the Combine is important. I guess, Scott, where do you sort of stand on how important is the Combine?
The way that the Combine works, there's two parts of the Combine that are critical. And there's one part of it that's completely overblown. The two parts that are critical are the medicals and the interviews. So basically nothing that we actually see on television. We're not seeing these guys going into a doctor's room.
Thank God.
We don't see these guys we're not seeing these guys in the doctor's office. We're not seeing these guys next to the teams doing these interviews where they get asked these weird ass questions like, do you find your mom attractive? Or what can you do with a block of wood? Like, how many different ways can you use a brick? Like, they get asked some stupid stuff that don't tell people anything. And I feel like sometimes it's just what teams do so they can go, you know what? Let's fuck with this kid.
Yeah, I think they want to get him off their game, because they come in with sort of prepared answers and they want to throw something out there to sort of get them out of their head and off their game and sort of make them sort of be a little bit more natural than sort of this is, I believe my biggest, the whole spiel, basically.
Yeah. My biggest weakness is I work too hard.
Yeah, that type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. But let's just not ask stupid, weird ass questions like that.
Okay.
Use some common sense, NFL, please. Um, Oi. Yeah. Oi.
Now, I think the thing, Scott, though, here's where I'm gonna differ a little bit with you. I do think the combine is a lot more important than people say it is. I think the drills do matter because I think the drills, it's one of those things where I think, you hear a lot of people talking about it like, oh, well, the combine doesn't affect that much of the part of the evaluation.
Oh, it
It's,
does.
it's 10%, it's 15%, whatever the case may be. I think whatever number people say it is, double it. That's the reality. So it's
Yep.
one of those things where, to me, you see every year it affects guys' draft status every year. Chris Conley is a great example of this. No one knew who Chris Conley was. You could have been a diehard Georgia fan, and you were
That
like,
that's a lie. That's a lie.
no,
That's an
I'm just saying, like, it's
absolute
one of
lie.
those things.
Because Chris Conley was having a great career at Georgia. Everybody at Georgia knew who the hell he was. People in the AFC in the SEC knew exactly who he was. All right. He had a very good career at Georgia. He had his best year with friggin' Hudson Mason as his quarterback, and people going, man, if this guy could just throw the ball, Conley would probably had another 500, 600 yards. He keeps overthrowing Conley. And when you saw those jump numbers and those other numbers, you're like, damn, how the hell was this kid getting overthrown? Because Hudson Mason was that shitty. Let's be honest here.
Look, I don't buy that. Like, people thought Chris Conley was a draftable guy, but all of a sudden he jumps out the gym.
I
He
mean, I had
runs.
a fifth round grade on him. And then the combine rose him to a fourth, then he got drafted in the third, which isn't that crazy.
See, but that's the point I'm trying to make. If the combine wasn't that important, guys wouldn't jump 2 rounds. They wouldn't jump at all.
Well, I mean, he
But
was being talked about as a fourth rounder. I was like, I don't see it. And then he had the combine. I was like, all right, well, he's going to get boosted up a little bit from the combine.
that's what I'm saying. Like, all of a sudden, Chris Conley goes from a guy that, yeah, he can, we can put him on our roster and he can add depth, to all of a sudden he's a guy. Oh, now he has upside. Like, for Falcons example, even though this wasn't a combine thing, it was a pro day thing, but Desmond Southward all of a sudden. Desmond Southward went from a special teams sort of backup level 6th, 7th round talent to he runs a 4.3 and has a 42-inch vertical, and all of a sudden he has starting potential in the NFL. It's just one of those things where people will sit there and say, oh, the combine doesn't matter, but it does, because you can move up you can go from a late day 3 guy to suddenly being in the mix in the top 100. You can go from a low level, second, third round guy, and all of a sudden you have a combine, you jump up into the late part of the first round, or vice versa. So I think when people say that the combine doesn't matter that much, I think they're lying, because I think we're all human beings and we're all fallible. And if you understand the difference between a guy who runs a 4.4 or a 4.6, or for a 10-yard split, if you're a wide receiver and you run a 1.45 10-yard split versus a 1.65 10-yard split, and you understand what that means in terms of your ability to get off the line of scrimmage and accelerate and run past guys, of course you're a fallible person, and you're going to sit there and look at the guy who runs a 1.45 in a much more favorable light and look at his upside and his potential, as opposed to the 1.65 guy, and you're like, well, what you see is what you get. Even though if you based it purely off of the tape, you might come away thinking, the 1.65 guy was the better player. So that's all I say when I say I think sort of the backlash against the backlash with the combine tends to get a little overblown.
I mean, I do agree. Because you'll have situations where you have guys like Keenan Allen who run a 4.6 and then go on to have a great career. You'll have guys like Anquan Bolden who get drafted in the second round because he didn't have a great combine and just looked like a stud his entire career. He may not be a Hall of Famer, but he's a hell of a football player.
Yeah, Keenan Allen's a good example. Like, if you had asked people in January who's your number one receiver, they would have said Keenan Allen. And a couple of years before, the same question, most people would have said Alshon Jeffrey. And then all of a sudden they go to the combine and they run slower and they don't do all the things. They don't get the measurables that people want them to get, and all of a sudden they're a second, third round picks. So, you're right. Those are good examples. So speaking of getting those measurables, what are some of the things that you look for when you're evaluating combine workouts?
I have formulas. Back in 2010, when I was starting up my website, ScarDraft, which has now been defunct, because I got lazy and didn't feel like doing the website.
Okay, that's a good reason.
That's why I write for the Falcoholic and Spotrack now, not Spotrack, Sportsnet, because I really just don't feel like doing all the back end headache BS that comes with the website. I developed these formulas for speed, agility, and explosion. And explosion ends up turning into a horsepower rating for the player. Honestly, when it comes to certain positions, I just throw out a lot of my combine numbers. Like running back, all I really care about is your weight, your 40 time, and your film. The rest of it, couldn't give two shits. I need your weight, your 40 time, your film. Fullbacks, I really just don't care. You're a fullback. It's all about your film. You're not getting drafted anyway because you're a fullback.
Yeah. There you go.
For receivers, there's so many different things you can do, but your combine has to match your film. Example, you're a speed receiver. You run a 4.35. You have great speed numbers. Your weight may be 180 pounds. You might be 6'1". You might have good like big old hands. I'm gonna be like, all right, this guy fits. A guy like Laquan Treadwell. I'm expecting basically Keenan Allen style numbers there. 6'2", 200 pounds, 4.6 40. The rest of it, I really don't care. Like the rest of it, if he does everything about what it seems, he'll be fine. The most predictive these numbers are for is my tight ends, my edge, and my defensive linemen. So like for tight end, I need you to have a speed rating above a certain point, an agility rating above a certain point, an explosion rating above a certain point. For an edge, it's the 125, 115, 210 marker for my absolute minimums. And the reason why I do that is when I go back through and I look at all the different guys that I've graded throughout the years at edge, the ones that are above those minimums are Mario Williams, Kyle Vanden Bosch. Yeah, you've got Davis Tull, Vernon Golston, but then you've got some steals out there like Mark Anderson, Connor Barwin, DeMarcus Ware had great numbers back in the day, Cliff Averill, Von Miller, Bud Dupree had great numbers, Michael Johnson, Khalil Mack, Vic Beasley. Like when you look at the top 25, 30 guys, there's a common setup and then there's a common production because of that setup. Justin Houston, Chris Long, Brian Arakpo, Anthony Barr. These are guys that all tend to do well. And their film matched up with their explosion numbers. So when you see it, you're like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Another guy that had a really great explosion number was Ezekiel Ansah. And he got drafted top 5. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. He's a freak athlete, and he's going to a wide 9. He should be fine. He's had a great career so far. Just 3 years in, he's had something like 8 sacks, and 15 sacks. As a number 5 overall pass rusher, that's exactly what you're expecting out of him. So basically, I basically just plug you into the formula. If you look good in the formula, it boosts you up a little bit for me. So if I see Shaq Lawson and he ends up with a speed number, 140 plus, an agility number 130 plus, an explosion number about 225 plus, that's gonna catch my eye. I'm gonna be like, oh hey, Shaq Lawson, this is matching up with the film. Because that's what happened with Preston Smith last year, and he had a pretty good season.
Yeah.
As far as linebackers, really, I just want to see raw speed, raw power. I look more at the drills than anything else, but a couple of guys that stood out to me at the combine itself, Michael Kendricks back in 2012, AJ Hawk in 06, DJ Williams out of Miami in 04. Aaron Curry stood out in the combine, but wound up looking like crap on the actual field. Jared Mayo out of Tennessee. Kevin Pierre-Louis out of Boston College. Patrick Willis in 07 had a ridiculous combine. I think he had like a 4.37 40 and just insane combine numbers. 4.37 40, something like a 4.0. It was just ridiculous. James Anderson had a good combine. Luke Kuechly had one of the best combines ever. What's his name? Bobby Wagner had a great combine. If Bobby Wagner was like a little bit quicker in his shuttle, he probably would have gone 20 picks higher because he was a freak athlete there. Bruce Irvin had a just ridiculous combine, and when he went in the first round, it wasn't shocking based on athleticism. It was shocking based on film and some of the off-field stuff we heard. And then cornerback, you just want raw speed. Like Patrick Peterson, Byron Jones, Antonio Cromartie. Those are the top 3 guys on my speed scores. And those happen to be 3 guys who were drafted ridiculously high. But Darrelle Revis is up there. Vontae Davis is up there. Prince Amukamara, Charles Tillman, Aqib Talib. I know I had Trufant with a pretty high score. 31st overall. A couple guys that went way later but had really good scores were guys like Justin Coleman out of Tennessee, and he looked pretty good with New England this past year. Keenan Lewis looked really good in 09. Robert Blanton has made a solid transition to safety after kind of stinking it up a little bit at corner. Jason McCourty had a great set of numbers. Safety, I still haven't figured out safety. Like, you're either good up here or you're just a shitty safety.
Okay.
I mean, that's basically what it boils down to.
Pretty much.
You can have all the athleticism in the world. If you just don't have the brains, you're going to suck at safety. Like, looking at my top 15 guys, the only one that's made any sort of impact is David Bruton and like Gerard Page. Eric Reed looked good athletically. William Moore's number 20, and he had a good career, but these are the kind of guys where the bigger the body, the faster they are, the more they're going to break down and just destroy themselves on the field.
Yeah, safety is a mental position. I would agree with you on that one. That's why, we talked about this in the past. That's why I don't think either of us are big fans of Jaron Kearse.
He's a pussy, man.
Yeah.
He's soft.
There you go.
Like that's why I don't like Jaron Kearse. He's just soft.
All right. So we got a combine mailbag question from Evan Birchfield. He says, what are some of the dark horse players you'll be looking at during the combine?
In this year's draft?
Yeah.
Well, I was really hoping to get Byard's numbers at the combine from Middle Tennessee State, but he didn't even get invited. Yannick Ngakui out of Maryland. I'd love to see what he runs at the combine. Victor Ochi out of Stony Brook. He's one of those guys that I think could be a nice late round steal. I can't wait to see what every single one of these defensive tackles do, but Vernon Butler is the name that's really intriguing me out of all of them. At wide receiver, I really want to see if Braxton Miller's that as fast as he looks on film. I can't wait to see what Marquez North finally runs, if he runs. At running back, I want to see what Derrick Henry does, just because I think it's going to be interesting. I think seeing Henry do a 4.55 would probably do wonders for him. Anything faster than that is just gravy. But farther down, I want to see what Keith Marshall does out of Georgia. I'd love to see what Keenan Reynolds from Navy does. And at quarterback, honestly, this is a pretty frustratingly weird class. Because it's basically, do you have guys with potential, or do you have guys that just suck? And there's a lot of guys that just fucking blow in this class. There's like 8 serviceable quarterbacks. There's like 3 guys who I would take as potential starters. And then there's just a bunch of crap after that. Like just god awful crap. Like Luke McCown, 3rd string crap.
Okay.
Where if this guy is going into the game one time in his career, he might not lose the game for you, but you're shitting yourself the whole time he's out on the field going, oh my God, I hope we're playing a team that sucks. I hope we're playing the Browns. I hope we're playing the Bucks. I hope we're playing this. I hope we're playing that. The Lovie Smith-led Bucks.
Okay. I got you.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like,
yeah.
Holy hell. We've got 7 Dan Orlovskis in this class.
Good old Dan Orlovsky.
He's
Dan
tough.
Orlovsky's like been in the league for like 8 years, hasn't he? It's
Yeah, he's
ridiculous.
been in the league like a no, dude. Orlovsky's been in the league since 05.
Oh wow. Okay.
Dan Orlovsky has become the brand new version of Jason Garrett. He's been in the league over a dozen years, and I think he's played maybe 12 games.
That sounds right. And
They were all the same year because his starter got hurt. And it was like 08 when they went 0 and whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan Orlovsky. Evan's question about dark horse players. I don't really have a list of guys that are dark horses because I haven't done that much draft research. The honest truth is I'm going to let the combine sort of tell me which players I should start looking at based off of the guys that sort of are not being talked about and have put up good numbers. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's not going to sort of make me differentiate who are guys worth a look and who aren't. If there's one particular player that I'm looking forward to seeing what he does, I want to see how fast Tyler Boyd runs a 40. Because I feel like if he runs faster than people think he will, and that's probably going to be like people probably think he'll run like a 4.58 or a 4.62 or something like that, then I think he'll start getting talked about as a first round pick. But if he runs sort of that slow 40, then he'll just be stuck as a second round pick or whatever. And if he's stuck as a second round pick, then we might be talking, you might hear me start talking a little bit more about the Falcons taking a wide receiver in the second round. So, other than that, if players like I want to see the pass rushers, how they test, just because I do think it matters quite a bit with pass rushers, probably more than I put a little bit more stock in testing with pass rushers than I do a lot of other positions. So I'm curious about those guys. But If you're asking me for a dark horse, I have no idea. Okay. Now we got a couple more mailbag questions that we didn't get to. Obviously, you want to get into those, Scott?
Sure.
All right. Our first one comes from Cook in 23. He says, obviously, we have a lot of holes on our team. What needs should be filled first?
In terms of priority, offensive line, specifically center.
Okay. I'm trying to disagree with that, and I don't. If I'm just going to play devil's advocate, I'll say middle linebacker.
I mean, yeah, that'd be the number 2 for me. I just think you can get away with a 3rd or 4th round middle linebacker as long as they're a fast athlete, as opposed to a center. I think you need a guy who can read the line, do the right line calls, and snap the ball effectively. So worst case scenario, I think you're spending a 2nd round pick on Ryan Kelly out of Alabama for that spot.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Evan Birchfield asked, when the season starts, how many stopgap starters do you think we'll have on defense?
Personally, I think we'll have 3. Wouldn't shock me to see one at strong safety. And if I had to guess, it'd be Kamal Ishmael. And I think it'd be because they drafted a guy in the mid to late rounds that they want to develop. I think at weak side linebacker, there could be a stopgap guy. Say Phillip Wheeler. Say they re-sign him. And then I think if Tyson Jackson's still with the team, honestly, with or without Tyson Jackson, I think strong side defensive end is going to have a stopgap kind of guy. Whether it's Tyson Jackson, Malachi Goodman, a free agent they signed for cheap, pretty much anybody that they put there, I think, is going to be a stopgap guy. I don't think we have a long-term starter at strong side defensive end on the roster right now.
Yeah, if I'm trying to think of guys, I think probably whoever's the Sam linebacker, which would probably be Brooks Reed, so that's one. I kind of think Ricardo Allen's a stopgap. I feel like we're going to get a safety like in the 2nd round, so I feel like that guy won't be a stopgap. You can say Babineau if you want to consider Babineau a starter. Technically he's a stopgap. He's probably going to either retire next year or be a backup. Whoever's the nose tackle probably is going to be a stopgap. Whoever replaces Soliai is probably going to be a stopgap. And if we don't take a defensive end in that 1st round or 1st or 2nd round, then you might see us have a stopgap opposite Beasley. Like a guy like a Chris Long or somebody like that. So I don't know, what was that, 4 or 5? So I think, it's probably a decent chance it's like 4 or 5 stopgaps. Which is, I guess, what we had like 7 this past season. So I guess that's an improvement, right?
Yeah.
So we'll whittle it down. Eventually we'll get to like 1 or 2.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So Smorgasbord 9 asks, do you feel that Quinn's coaching staff develops talent better than Smitty's staff did?
Yeah, I really do. Because throughout the season, we were seeing guys actually get better. Even though the team did get worse as a whole, I do think a lot of that was luck. And the ball just not bouncing their way after Mike Person couldn't snap it. Yeah, I do think the team got better. I thought Matthews played his best football towards the end of the year. I thought Schrader did too. I thought Julio Jones was on another level this year. Tammy had a career year with Atlanta and just shocked everybody. Because even Aaron, who was a big Tammy backer, was like, dude, I didn't think this was going to be what I saw.
That's a true statement.
You know, Patrick DeMarco and Devontae Freeman got in there with the running backs coach. I forget his name off the top of my head. Got in there with the running backs coach and went from, you know, pretty much meh players at the position to DeMarco's the best fullback in the NFL, period. Devontae Freeman rightfully earned his spot as a second-team All-Pro this year. And if offensive line would have been better, his stats would have been even better than what they were. You know, Vic Beasley got better throughout the year. Rashid Hageman got better throughout the year. He finally looked like things were starting to click towards the end of the year. Even Tyson Jackson was looking better towards the end of the year. The team looked good for a good percentage of the season. And even in the games that they lost, they weren't getting blown out. They were still putting up a fight, which is much more than I could say for 2014. And then I think it's safe to say Trufant and Alford were the best they've ever been. And they're right on the verge of that Bobby Taylor, Troy Vincent level, like best in the NFL. That Lito Shepherd, Sheldon Brown. Like, I've always had a thing for when the Eagles put together a pair of corners that just are nasty together. That Asamoah, what was it? Asamoah, Asante Samuel combination. Like, Trufant and Alford together are just very fun to watch because they're that damn good. So I think as a whole, yeah, the coaching staff's way better at actually developing players. Yes, very much so.
Okay. Unpopular opinion alert. I think this is TBD, to be determined. You know, I think one of the bigger complaints about Mike Smith was that they didn't develop talent, and I think that's a little overblown by a lot of people. I don't think people were questioning their ability to develop talent when Matt Ryan was on the team and when Brent Grimes and Harvey Dahl and Jonathan Babineau and William Moore and Sean Weatherspoon, sort of these guys were in their prime early on in the Mike Smith tenure. So I think if we're, you know, using an apples to apples comparison and we're comparing, you know, Dan Quinn's first year under Mike Smith's first year, I don't think Dan Quinn holds up quite as well as Mike Smith does. At least overall, in terms of the talent development department, I don't necessarily see it. I think what really hurt Mike Smith down towards the end was, I think it's fair to say that they did not develop as much talent towards the end of his tenure, because I think their sort of priorities were all out of whack because they were looking at what's this final piece of the puzzle that we can add that's going to, you know, get us into the Super Bowl, as opposed to really sort of going with their core ideals and stuff like that. But, you know, we'll see what Quinn's staff does. I would certainly say probably I'm more confident that Quinn's going to be able to develop defensive talent than Mike Smith's staff was overall. But I think people are sort of people are sort of making the mistake in the assumption that what Mike Smith did in 2014 and 2013 at the end sort of is what he did all 7 years. And I think you can't sort of disregard the first 5 years under Mike Smith when, frankly, I think any of those teams from 2008 to 2012, they played this 2015 team, would have beaten, you know, this past year's team. So, you know, I don't think Smitty is as bad as his reputation suggests that he is now. Okay, we got another one from Smorgasborg9. Are all the scouting / GM staffing changes Do they indicate that Pioli being GM in the future, blank seems to respect them?
I think Dimitrov and Quinn are tied at the hip at this point. Because it seems like Quinn is basically saying, hey, this is my guy. And I think at this point, the next time that there's a new GM and coach, the entire staff is gone. Like top to bottom, house cleaning kind of gone. So I don't think that the Atlanta Falcons' next GM is anywhere near their current staff. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah, I agree. First of all, I don't think Scott Pioli would take the job if it meant Thomas Dimitroff got fired. They're longtime friends. You know, they've been friends since they were in their 20s, and now they're like in their 40s or 50s. So they've been friends for 20 plus years. So I just think, you know, loyalty and friendship would prevent Pioli from essentially stabbing Dimitroff in the back and taking the job behind his back. I agree with Scott. I think blank is basically going to give Dimitroff and Pioli and Quinn the same amount of leash. So you're looking at 2018, 2019, or whenever, when blank is going to sort of take a stock and assess how these guys have done once the stadium is open. I think that's, you know, a lot of what blank is sort of concentrating, the stadium, and obviously his cancer. Obviously, that's something that's probably a little more at the front of his mind than, you know, Scott Pioli, job status. Get well soon, Arthur. But it's one of those things where I do think ultimately if and when blank decides to make a change, he's, like Scott said, he's going to clean house and just basically start all over like he did in 08. But I think we're a couple of years away from that at the earliest. And you know, ideally, that's not going to be a situation because Quinn's going to win. And, you know, I'll stop complaining about bad Thomas Dimitroff moves because he'll actually start making good ones. So, you know, hopefully we won't have this.
Will you be okay if he goes from hitting, you know, the 45% he's hitting now to a 60%?
If he keeps having off seasons like, or at least draft classes like last year, I will back off on the Dimitroff. It's just, you know, for me, it was one of those things where I think he had 4 bad years where he was running the show, and he kind of has to have 4 good years to sort of balance that out in my mind.
4 bad years? 09 to 12?
Yeah, I'm counting not necessarily the 13 and 14 drafts, but the free agent moves that they made those years, I think were pretty bad. So
that's fair. I'd say that the 13 and 14 drafts are pretty good because that's pretty much, you know, Jake Matthews, Hageman, Trufant, Alford, Ishmael. Let's see.
Freeman,
yeah. Schrader. I count him as a 7th round pick because anytime you hit on an undrafted free agent, you might as well have drafted him. Okay. I feel like that's fair. I feel like no matter what you say about Paul Warlow, he's still a hit for an undrafted free agent.
Okay. I can't really dispute that.
I think we all agree there. Like he's not a starter, but he's definitely for an undrafted free agent out of Delaware. He's a hit.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been Bear Woods, I guess.
I mean, yeah, he could have been cut fresh out of camp and wound up being a 3-year starter. So,
okay, fair enough. All right, our next question comes from Rise Up Birds. He asks, "What do you predict Travis Benjamin's contract will look like, and what are the odds of him coming to Atlanta?"
Someone's gonna sign this man to a stupid contract. Like just dumb. I just have this bad feeling someone's going to be like, man, this is Mike Wallace. and give him 5 years, $60 million.
You know, given sort of how weak this wide receiver free agent class is, I think guys like Marvin Jones and Travis Benjamin are going to make probably more money than they should. Just because people are like looking around, like, because I expect Alshon Jeffrey to get tagged, so I don't think he's going to be out there. And so it's going to be like, if you want a starting wide receiver, the pickings are going to be pretty slim, and that's going to push up some guys' prices. And I think Benjamin's going to be one of those guys.
Here's the best way I know how to put it. Remember, NFL teams do some stupid shit every single year. Every year. No matter who they are. Like, give Pierre Garçon $42 million over 5 years. Like, who thought that was a good idea?
I don't think it's as bad as you're making it out to be.
Can that person give me $1 million?
You know, Garcon was pretty good in Washington for about 3 years.
He wasn't $42 million good.
That's fair enough.
And I say that $42 million good because right now he's in the last year of a contract that most of us looked at the time and were like, oh, he's only going to play 2 years of that. How does it feel to be wrong, everybody?
Yeah. With Benjamin, I'm you know, it's going to be interesting because we saw like Crabtree just got an extension from the Raiders for about $34 million over 4 years.
And that's fair because that's what he's worth.
Yeah, and I feel like that's going to be where Benjamin and some of these other guys are going to try to get that. I don't know if they're going to get quite that high, but I do feel like it's not going to be that far off.
Let's just use Torrey Smith's deal from last year as the what it's probably going to be. 5 years, $40 million, $22 million guaranteed.
Yeah.
Stupid, right?
That's probably fair. That's fair. Yeah, I think Benjamin's probably going to get like $7-8 million a year. I don't think he's really worth it that much, but that's what the market's going to give him. So, you know, if we could get him, like, I think his ideal price would be like $5 million a year, maybe $4 or $5 million, but he's going to get more than that, I think. Oh, and the second part of your question, Rise of Birds, I'm sorry, blanked on odds of him coming to Atlanta. I think if the free agent class was better, I think the odds would be pretty high. But I think because he's one of the few pretty good guys, I think the chances of us getting him are lower. Just because there's going to be a lot more competition to get him. So if you had asked me this a month ago, I probably would have said like, there's like a 50-50 shot that he lands in Atlanta. But now I'm more like 30% chance, maybe. Yeah, 25 maybe.
I'm not really worried about it.
Okay, we have one from the Falcon in Hawaii. He says, name your number one player that you'd want on the Atlanta Falcons roster from free agency this offseason, and what kind of contract would you offer him?
Kelechi Assembly, $45 million, 5 years. First year cap hit, probably looking somewhere in that $5 million range. Structure it to where most of the cap hits are next year and or 2017, 2018, because you can afford to put $10 million hits in each one of those years, even $12 million hits in each one of those years, and see the guy actually earn them. And then once he earns them and plays it through, you got a 30-year-old guy heading into his 5th year of the contract, making like $6 million, so it's not crazy at that point. I mean, I would love to have him. He'd be the guy to get this entire offseason.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because if you asked me this last week, I would have said Alex Mack. But it's one of those things where after I did the contract breakdown, you can check that out on FalcFans.com right now. And I basically projected him to get, the Falcons would have to pay him $45 million over 5 years to get him. And thinking about it a little bit more, I'm like, that might be a little too rich for my blood.
I'd rather just spend a second-round pick on Ryan Kelly.
Yeah. I don't know. It's tough.
Martin.
And so I'm trying to think of another person who was the number 2 guy on my list. And I'm sure I had a name a couple of weeks ago that I'm blanking on. But right now I'm probably thinking, just because I want to get the family reunion going, Jarrell Freeman. So what kind of contract would I give him? I'd probably give him 5 years, $28 million, even though he's 30. But it's one of those things where I know I'm giving him a 5-year deal, but it's really going to be a 2-year deal. So it's one of those things where if I can get Jarrell Freeman for 2 years for $15 million over 2 years, I'm fine with that. That's fine. If ideally I would want to get him for the same amount of money we paid Brooks Reed, but I think he'll make more than that. So I guess that would be my number 2 guy. All right, folks. All right, that's the end of it. That's our last mailbag question. We appreciate everybody for sending those questions. I know we usually get a little bit more, but I guess people didn't realize we were back from hiatus. We'll probably be back next week just because free agency kicks off and there'll actually be stuff to talk about, combine stuff and whatnot, free agency more in depth. If you guys want to get your mailbag questions on the show, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. You can tweet at me. I'm at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. You can tweet at the show at Falcons PFC. Be sure to rate us and subscribe to us on iTunes, Falcons Central Radio, and check us out on ProFootballCentral.com. All that jazz. I'm glad to be back, everybody.